Penguin Random House presents India Grows at Night, a liberal case for a strong state by Gurcharan Das, read by Suyash Mohan. If China must be regarded as nothing else but a state, Hindu political existence presents us with a people but no state. G.W.F. Hegel. Introduction. A rising economy, an aspiring society, and a declining state. The state exists for the sake of a good life, not for the sake of life alone. Aristotle, Politics 3.9. Indians rarely admit that India grows at night when they sit down to sip chai and talk about their country's messy road into the future. But that is only half the saying. The complete sentence is, India grows at night while the government sleeps, meaning that India may well be rising despite the state. Prosperity is, indeed, spreading across the country even as governance failure pervades public life. It is a tale of private success and public failure. The private home is neat, clean, and energetic. The government office is slothful, suffocating with controls and filled with mind-bending red tape. If it were a home, dirty dishes would be flung about the bedroom, old shoes and newspapers would be piled high in the kitchen, and everyone would have chai all day long. The difference between the two is a sense of responsibility in the Indian home. If you don't work, you don't eat. That accountability is missing in public life. How can a nation become one of the world's emerging powers despite a weak, ineffective state? And should India not grow during the day as well? It is questions like these that led me to write this book. I grew up in the idealistic days after independence when we passionately believed in Jawaharlal Nehru's dream of a modern and just India. We were all socialists then. As the years went by, I watched Nehru create a command economy which took us to a dead end. Instead of socialism, we ended up with statism, and we sardonically called it the license Raj. In my book, India Unbound, I recounted the story of those 4 decades of missed opportunities and my own personal humiliation during the license Raj. In 1991, India's economy was finally unshackled by liberal economic reforms, which lowered trade barriers and tax rates, broke state monopolies, unshackled industry and competition, and opened up to the rest of the world. Growth accelerated, prosperity began to spread, and the world began to speak about the rise of India. No one in India quite understands how their noisy, chaotic democracy of 1 billion people has become one of the world's fastest growing economies. After all, 60 countries implemented the same reforms as India did. Clearly, suppressed energy burst out after 1991, but no one imagined that Indian entrepreneurs would respond so quickly to create innovative, red-blooded firms who learned to compete brutally at home and have begun to stomp on the global stage. India's is a bottom-up story, unlike China's top-down success that has been orchestrated by an authoritarian state. After experiencing the pain of the license Raj, I became a libertarian, passionately committed to individual freedom and deeply suspicious of state power. The reforms were a defining moment in my narrative of national history in which India gained only its political independence in 1947. It did not win economic independence until 1991. India's rise has been enabled by 2 institutions of liberty, democracy and free markets. For our vibrant democracy, I give credit to Nehru, who laid its foundations. But India rose economically only after Nehru's over-regulating state stepped out of the way. With my commitment to individual liberty, I began to believe that the state was a second-order phenomenon, at best a protector of what people chose to do in private life or in civil society, and at worst capable of destroying those freedoms. I celebrated the heroic idea that India was rising despite the state. 2 decades later, I have realized that I might have been wrong. I am now convinced that the state is of first order importance. It can either allow human beings to flourish, or it can become the biggest obstacle to their realizing their potential. To rise despite the state is courageous, but it cannot be a long-term virtue. It only gets you so far. Prosperity does not magically appear when the government sleeps. India's recent success has come about because the state has quietly provided through the shadows reasonable property rights, reasonable security, and reasonable law and order. And now, India has begun to experience the limits of growing without the state. The growing at night strategy is no longer viable, and the task is to reform the institutions of the state. The state must come out of the shadows, and India should thrive during the day. What constitutes national success? This raises a deeper question in my mind. What constitutes national success? A successful nation, it seems to me, has these attributes. Politically, it is free, democratic, and accountable, with a rule of law that is strictly enforced. Economically, it is prosperous, dynamic, and reasonably equitable, and socially, it is peaceful, cohesive, and inclusive, striving to reduce hierarchy and increasing equality of opportunity. It is rare to find such a nation. Western democracies are free and prosperous, but their societies appear to be disintegrating. The nations in the East are prosperous and socially cohesive, but they are most unfree under authoritarian political regimes. Where does India stand? For decades, India scored high as a political democracy, middling as a hierarchical society, and poorly as an economy. But this changed after its economy was unfettered in 1991, and India went on to become the world's second fastest growing major economy in the first decade of the 21st century. Although prosperity has begun to spread and the middle class is growing rapidly, millions are still desperately poor and undernourished, with little access to clean water, good schools, and functioning health services. Socially, too, there have been considerable gains. Dalits and other backward castes have continued to rise through the ballot box and a surging economy. A middle class has begun to develop among the lower castes, and Mayawati, until recently the Chief Minister of India's largest state, Uttar Pradesh, is the proud symbol of their ascent. This virtuous circle has not yet touched the tribal areas where Maoist violence continues to rage. But the shadows of communal violence have receded, despite the events in Gujarat in 2002 and Delhi in 1984, and periodic provocations by extremists. The attraction of Hindutva as an electoral platform is also declining, especially among the young, and minorities in India feel more secure. Politically, however, the Indian state has declined into a state of paralysis. Governance has become a serious problem, and corruption is pervasive. Although elections have become fairer thanks to the Election Commission, and local democracy continues its slow march down to the village after the 73rd Amendment to the Constitution, the state's inability to deliver the most basic services provoked one observer to call India a flailing state, a theme that I elaborate in Chapter 4. While economic growth is a necessary condition for lifting the poor, it is not a sufficient condition. People also need honest policemen and diligent officials, functioning schools and primary health centers. What is a liberal strong state? A successful liberal democracy has three elements.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?